Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of our expansion Buffalo Wings. And we are about midway through our first season in Major League Baseball with Buffalo here in 2026. And you can see the Wings are borderline respectable at 37 and 46, tied with the Marlins for fifth in the National League East, game ahead of the Expos and 5 games ahead of the basement dwelling Philadelphia Phillies. But certainly with a 2-8 record over our last 10 games, we could be dwelling in the NL East basement in a week or so if we don't kind of turn things around. One opportunity for us to turn things around for the long term is coming up here later on today when we do the Major League Baseball first year player draft. Our expansion Buffalo Wings and the other expansion team, the Nashville Stars, will be picking 1 and 2 in what looks like a star-studded draft. It's really a draft where if we were picking 10th, 15th, 20th, even maybe 25th, we'd still probably be able to get one of the really good players that are in the draft this year. It's very deep. There seems to be a good amount of quality on top. But we are going to have our choice of anybody, which will be nice. Hopefully, we'll be able to bring somebody on board that's going to be a real impact player for this organization over the course of this playthrough, which hopefully will be decades and be a big step with the number 1 pick in a few minutes. Before we get to that, though, I did want to address one comment from our last episode. I had mentioned at the end of the last episode when I kind of went through the stats of how everyone's performing this year that Tanner Houck has had a brutal year. And Wesley Jones suggested a potential swap with Mike Burrows, who's been great out of our bullpen. And certainly is a profile that indicates he could be a effective major league starter. Is he going to put up a 1.19 ERA as a major league starter? Probably not. But is he going to put up a 6.84 ERA as a major league starter? Probably not either. But when I look at Houck's ratings, I still feel like he should be a more than respectable starter. I mean, he's got a 4-pitch arsenal, slightly above average stuff in control. His movement isn't great, but I don't think his movement is so bad that the 13 home runs that he's allowed in 51 and a third innings is something that's going to continue. I just feel he's been kind of unlikely to have given up that insane amount of home runs in this amount of innings pitched. And given that his ratings suggest that he's a decent major league pitcher, I'm going to give him another couple starts at this point. But I do appreciate that recommendation by Wesley. And I do think that Burrows, who's about 3.5 years younger, would be a more than rational player to swap in and try if I do decide to move Houck out of the rotation. But we're probably going to give him another couple starts before we make that decision one way or the other. And we did get a win against Atlanta today, 7-6. Pretty nice comeback. We were down 6-3 heading into the 8th inning. Scored 1 run in the bottom of the 8th to make it 6-4, and then 3 runs in the bottom of the 9th to turn the win probabilities completely around. Jordan Westberg, third baseman, who we picked up in the expansion draft, 3-run homer against Huascar Ynoa, who we remember from an alternative baseball universe in our Cincinnati Reds playthrough, to win the game for us. And hopefully we can start stabilizing the situation with the Wings and at least get into a situation where we're a win one, lose one kind of team. We've been on a pretty brutal stretch in the end of June and early July. You can see before today we lost 4 of our first 5 games in July. And we also lost our last 4 games in June and 5 of our last 6 in June. So hopefully the W today will start getting our team in the right direction. And to have done it at home against a pretty strong Braves team is hopefully a good start. Then we'll finish off before the All-Star break with 3 games at home against the Expos before we get a few days off. And at the end of our last episode, I took a look at the 15 5-star potential players in this insanely deep-looking draft. I've got it down to 8 players that I think I'm going to consider with the number 1 overall pick, so we'll talk through them. Some of you have given me comments on some of those players in the last episode, which I do appreciate. The only pitcher that's a 5-star prospect and a guy that is still under consideration for us is Juan Maldonado, starting pitching prospect coming out of Troy University. Don't love the poor competition level that he's faced. Do love the high leadership and work ethic. Don't appreciate the low intelligence, but he's a 20-year-old guy. Certainly looks like he's going to have a pretty competent 3-pitch arsenal. If the changeup develops and it develops to that full extent, he's going to have a really impressive 4-pitch arsenal. So well above average stuff, movement and control potentially from this player. He's a lefty, really good stamina, excellent at holding runners. If we're going to go with a pitcher number 1 overall, it certainly will be Juan Maldonado. But as you can see, there are a whole large list of 5-star batting prospects for us to consider. And I'll talk about the 7 who have made my cut and are going to likely be one of the players that we end up picking in a few minutes. First and foremost is Josh Blevins, 18-year-old left-handed hitter, high schooler, like the durability, like the high intelligence. Don't love that he's basically a DH at 18 years old. He is 6'5", so we can play him at first, but his defensive ratings are pretty brutal even for a first baseman. Not a ton of speed, but that bat is certainly tempting. If he fully develops, he's well above average to excellent in all 5 of the batting ratings, which is just a pretty rare feat to find. And his contact could be off the charts. His home run power and avoid strikeouts could both be excellent, and still very good to excellent in gap power and eye. So just a potentially incredible hitting prospect. If he had a high work ethic also, it would be even harder for me to say no to him. But Andrew Gratton suggested that Blevins was the guy, and certainly can't disagree with that assessment. He is definitely under consideration. Dylan Bond, right field prospect, high schooler, only 17 and a half years old, one of the younger players available in the draft. Another guy who looks like he's going to have a pretty nice batting profile. Not going to walk as much as Blevins, does have the high work ethic. A bit more versatile defensively, potentially. Corner outfielder, it's 6'7". He could certainly play him at first base also. Doesn't have a ton of speed either, but certainly a interesting candidate in my perspective. From my perspective. Another guy that is still in the mix as far as I'm concerned is the 3rd baseman, Dylan Masonave. Another guy who looks like he could have a really good bat, high intelligence, definitely has the defensive profile of a 3rd baseman. Would prefer the range and error ratings to be a little higher, but certainly looks like he could be a pretty solid to potentially excellent 3rd baseman a few years down the line. Looking for a bit more money than some of the other players, but we've got tons of money to spend, so that should not be a key determination on who we're going to pick here in the first round. And there may be some opportunities with the amount of money that we've got to spend to take a flyer on somebody in the second, third, or fourth round, such as perhaps the impossible to sign Edgar Ojeda. Another guy that we are thinking about is the catcher, Walt Miller. Jay Bird made the good point in the comments to our last episode that this guy almost looks like a no-brainer. The contact and the home run power are both excellent for any position, much less a catcher. Looks like he could be above average in terms of his catcher ability and his catcher arm. 17-year-old, for what it's worth, he's not even looking for too much money, just $1.6 million. Only real negative, he's brutally slow, but that is not a unique characteristic for catchers, especially in this game. One thing that works against him a little bit, in my mind, and perhaps it shouldn't, is that we do already have the number 5 prospect in baseball in our former international amateur free agent signing, Andres Medina, who's down in our DSL team, not hitting well this year, but still looks like he could be excellent defensively if he fully develops, with plus contact and plus home run power. Clearly, at this point, Medina doesn't look like he has all of the potential that Walt Miller does, but at one time, Medina and his potential profile looked pretty similar to what Walt Miller's is. So you never know how these young players, these teenagers, are going to develop. But I probably shouldn't let the fact that I have Medina already in the system affect my view on Miller, but on the margin it may. But can't argue that he is a premier looking type of prospect. Couple other guys I'm interested in are center fielders. Jonte Powers, 18-year-old high schooler. Like the high work ethic, has decent speed, could play, multiple positions in the outfield, and certainly looks like with potential 70 contact and 70 home run power that he could be a very interesting hitter for us. Another center fielder I really like, Josh Robinson. The bat looks potentially awesome with contact, gap power, and home run power that really jump off the page. Not great defensively, probably ends up being a left fielder, quite honestly. Could play him at first base. He's 6'1", has decent infield ratings potentially. So corner outfielder, first baseman, DH, but the bat certainly looks very impressive and good personality in the clubhouse as well. And the 8th player that I am going to consider is someone who was pointed out by a couple of viewers. Sakruth and Bald Sherlock both mentioned this guy, who is not a 5-star prospect, but Deshaun Seifu. And he is actually somebody who, after the episode was filmed last night, I started doing a little more digging offline, and he was someone who definitely piqued my interest. So appreciate Sakruth and Bald Sherlock kind of bringing him up as well, because he's definitely a prospect that is worth talking through. 22 years old, coming out of Fordham, but he is durable. He has incredible speed, very good bunter, and actually in terms of an infielder, that 50 error rating is not optimal. I don't think he's a shortstop, but he is somebody who at 6'1" could really play any position in the infield in a pinch. Would want that error rating to certainly be better at second and short, and in a perfect scenario at third as well. He's also a guy who's talented enough to play just about anywhere in the outfield. And we haven't even talked about the fact that right now, with a 50 contact and 65 gap power and that speed, he probably could be a decent major league hitter at this point. and he's got the potential to have off the charts contact and gap power, which with that speed combination, stealing and base running, this is a guy who could be, hitting 50 doubles and 20 triples in a season. Never going to have great home run power, but he is certainly a very interesting prospect. Have not looked yet at who our scout recommends. I've got to kind of get the list pared from 8 to a more manageable number at this point before I'm going to take a look at that and see what our scout recommends, but definitely some difficult decisions to be made. There were obviously a fair amount of college players that you can see here who are 5-star potential that I talked about in our last episode who didn't make the cut of guys that I would consider with the number 1 overall pick. And I've pared it down to 4 players now that I'm going to consider with the number 1 overall pick. Hope that when we check in with my scout, he comes and says that one of these 4 is who he'd go with. That could be some good feedback for me. One of the final 4 is certainly the shortstop, Deshaun Seifu. Thank the commenters who mentioned him. One of the obvious issues when you look at our team statistics this year is a lack of speed. We're near the bottom of the league in stolen bases. Clearly bringing on a hitter like Seifu would help with that tremendously. And at 22 years old, with the fact that he already can kind of hit it close to a major league level, he's not too far away. The durability is great. He's got potential to be just I don't want to say an on-base machine, because although with that contact and gap power, he could be a 330, 340 kind of hitter. He could be a 330, 340 kind of hitter at the major league level with a 380, 390 type on-base percentage, unless that eye develops all the way up to major league average, in which case he can probably get it up over 400 by a little bit. But he's never going to strike out. The only criticism of him is the lack of home run power and the fact that that infield error rating is only average. Maybe it can get a little better with some coaching. I think I'd probably be inclined to play him at third base. I just feel with the number of chances he's going to get at second or short that error rating would cost us a bit, but the range is going to make a lot of plays. So he is a very interesting prospect, I can't lie. And I think it was either Sakruth or Bald Sherlock brought up the point that if we take him in the first round, there's certainly a chance that one of the high schoolers we really like, since there are so many of them, could be available at the top of the second round as well. So Deshaun Seifu is definitely in the mix. Very intriguing prospect. Second guy who makes it into the Final Four, the center fielder, Josh Robinson. Just love the potential bat here. Feel pretty confident it's going to develop with that good work ethic. A man without a position to some degree, as we talked about. He could play first base or a corner outfield position for us. But the bat has potential to be pretty special, and the high work ethic makes me think that he's likely to reach that potential. Third guy in the Final Four is the catcher, Walt Miller. It's not a position of need for us, but there is certainly the argument, particularly in baseball compared to some of the other sports, that you don't draft for need. You take the best prospect available, because these guys are 3, 4, 5 years away from being able to help you at the major league level in most cases, and you have no clue how they're going to develop and what your major league roster is going to look like down the line and what you're going to need. certainly his potential to be a perennial all-star catcher, with above average ability and catcher arm. A very intriguing prospect, and one of the final four that I'm thinking about. And last but not least is the first baseman, Josh Blevins. And with him, it is just one of the most well rounded bats you could imagine if it completely develops. Love the durability. This is a guy who should be out there 150, 155 games a year, hopefully for 10, 12, 15 years with whoever ends up drafting him. If he had a high work ethic, it would make the chance of reaching that potential a bit higher. But he does have high intelligence. We're going to have a lot of good influences and a lot of great coaches in our organization. Don't love the lack of defense. Don't love the mediocre-ish speed. But the bat is special. And going to be hard to say no to any of these guys, but particularly Josh Blevins. As I think about it, if I had to drop somebody out of the list, it's probably Josh Robinson would be the first one I would drop out. As I said, I think he's going to likely reach his full potential with that high work ethic, and the bat is very intriguing. The only criticism of him is that he's probably going to strike out more than you'd like when all is said and done. But if I had to bring it to a final three, it would be the pure bat in Josh Blevins, the potential all-star catcher in Walt Miller, and then the shortstop, Deshaun Seifu, who is just potentially an absolutely dynamic offensive player with that contact and speed. And if he can get that eye up to average, he's never going to hit any home runs, but that's really the only criticism of Seifu. So we'll get the draft underway, and let's see who our scouting director recommends. Is it Blevins? Is it Miller? Is it Seifu? Or is it somebody else who's going to give us something else to think about? And he recommends Josh Robinson, who was, the fourth guy in our final four, the guy that we just dropped out of the list to make things even more challenging for us. Like I said, Robinson, with that high work ethic and the high leadership, arguably the cleanest of any of these prospects. It's going to be an interesting decision. I wish I could phone a friend right now and have the wisdom of all of you who are watching help me with this decision. I do feel like it's something where I really can't go wrong because I like all of these guys, but I'm definitely going to be second guessing myself, and I'm pretty confident that none of the 3 or 4 guys that we're down to will be available in the second round. Definitely feel like we're going to be getting a really interesting player at the top of the second round, but this is our one shot at anybody in the draft, obviously, and it could be the only time we have that shot in this entire playthrough. When I went to bed last night, I thought that when I was doing this episode today, I was going to end up taking Josh Blevins. The bat is just potentially extraordinary if he fully develops. But he's a man without a position. But he is a left-handed hitter. And our park favors for home runs lefties a bit over righties. But I think all of these other guys have bats that are potentially special as well. Blevins' bat is the most potentially special without a doubt. I was going to say that I'm not going with him, but I just can't let go of him this quick. I am going to let go of Walt Miller. I know some of you are screaming at me, take the potential perennial all-star catcher. If I knew more about his personality, or if he had a more extreme personality where I knew that he had high work ethic or high intelligence or something that was likely to help with his development, I'd feel better doing it. But I don't feel confident that he's going to end up any better than Medina when all is said and done. And we've already kind of invested at the top of, well, not really the top of, but big money from international amateur free agency in Medina in the recent years. So we're going to pass on Walt Miller. I know I had said I had let Josh Robinson go, but our scout is making me rethink that. Love the work ethic. I don't love that he's almost 19 years old and he's a high school prospect. There's an argument that these other guys who are a year younger than him that we could draft now may have a better chance to reach their full potential with extra time to do that. But I think I'm going to pass on Robinson. So it's really going to come down to Blevins and that incredible bat, or Deshaun Seifu, who also has a potentially incredible bat, a different type of bat, but also potentially incredible, also durable, going to be out there every day. He's got that speed, and he's a guy who could be helping in the major leagues at the end of this season, quite honestly. I think I'd want him to get a little more seasoning, to get that contact up a bit, but more importantly, to get the eye and the avoiding strikeouts up a little bit more before he's exposed to major league pitching. But that speed is just such a weapon, and it's a need of our Buffalo team right now. And I was just saying, you don't draft for need, but if you're picking a college player who's 22 years old who you can envision in your lineup in the next 3 to 15 months, then maybe there is an argument to draft for need. As I talked about, he's not a shortstop, but he could play short, he could play second, he could play third, he could play first, he could play left, he could play center, he could play right. He's got versatility to play wherever we need. Not going to be a great defensive player with that low error rating, but if I had to have a 65 and a 50 in range and error, I think I'd rather have it be the way that he has. I'd rather have him get to more balls, and he's not going to handle them all perfectly, than someone with less range who's going to be more sure-handed when he gets to the balls, but just not get to as many chances as the guy with the 65 range. So, and as I mentioned, we've got good infield coaching. When we look at our personnel, Luis Martinez is outstanding at teaching the infield. So there is potential that maybe we're able to get Seifu a little better in some of these ratings over time, and make him an even more dynamic offensive player if we bring him on board. A more dynamic defensive player. I think he's clearly going to be a dynamic offensive player. That bat from Blevins is just so well balanced. It's hard for me to pass on him. And as I mentioned when I went to bed last night, I thought there was no way possible that I wasn't going to end up with Blevins, but Seifu is just such a unique prospect with that potential off-the-charts contact, gap, power, and speed. We're going to go with Seifu over Blevins. As I said, I'm kind of going in the opposite direction of where I thought I would go. that Blevins bat and the balance is just incredibly tempting, but Seifu with the speed, with the fact that he can play just about any position defensively, with the durability, the fact that there is somewhat less uncertainty. In a perfect world, Blevins probably has a higher ceiling than Seifu. When you look at the batting ratings, he certainly is a higher ceiling than Seifu. But Seifu's got such a high floor. He probably can play in the majors right now. And if we get another 10 or 15 points in contact and a little bit better eye, a little bit better at avoiding strikeouts, this guy is a perennial 300 hitter in a worst case scenario, and a guy who could be contending for batting titles regularly in a best case scenario, with the opportunity, like I said, to hit 50 doubles, 20 triples, and steal 40, 50, 60 bases in a season, while giving us real good range at a position in the infield that's likely to be important. So we're going to go with Seifu here in the first round. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I thought there was no way I would pass at Blevins, but I think Seifu is such a unique player that I can't say no. So Deshaun Seifu, you are the number 1 overall pick in the 2026 Major League Baseball first-year player draft. Welcome to Buffalo, dude. So with Deshaun Seifu picked, now it's just a matter of finding out who's around at our next pick. And obviously there's some supplemental picks in there. So there's going to be 33 regular first round picks, followed by 4 supplemental picks, and then Nashville is picking ahead of us in every other round. So we've got 38 picks before we're going to be on the clock again. I think there will be a good player out there for us. Is it going to be one of the other 3 players who made it to our final list? No. Is it going to be one of the other 7 players we've talked about in this episode? Almost certainly not. But I think there's definitely going to be an opportunity for us to get an impact player also in the second round. And then, as you can, actually, you can't see because that's Nashville now rather than us, but similar to Nashville, we've got an insane amount of money available. So certainly when we get to the 3rd, 4th round, if there's a player who's still lingering, who is an impossible to sign player, or a guy who's just looking for absolutely wacky money, we might be able to bring on somebody who's kind of a first or second round talent in the 3rd or 4th round, simply because most teams probably aren't going to have the financial flexibility that we do by having the lowest payroll in baseball right now. So let's go ahead and I'm going to just move down a little bit so we'll let it be a surprise. I want to see when some of those other players were taken. So we're going to auto draft until our pick by Buffalo. And let's just take a look at the draft log right now. Blevins waited all the way to 10th to go to the Angels. Josh Robinson went 12th to the Marlins. And the catcher, Walt Miller, made it all the way to 25th. So interesting. Chris Osmond, a shortstop, 4-star prospect. Decent defensive player, but just not the same kind of bat that we've looked at with some of those other players. Went number 2 overall. Jim Bryant, Xiaofeng Wan, Dan Mankiewicz, Mason Ave, Dylan Bond, a lot of guys that we talked about in this episode or our previous episode have already gone. So take a look at the draft pool now and see who's available. There still are two 5-star potential players, including one, Jonte Powers, who made our list at the start of this episode. And taking a look at the pictures, there's a couple of 4-star potential guys out there. So I'm going to do a little more scouting here in the second round and kind of talk through the top options, in my opinion, with you. You can obviously, if you're looking closely, see down here Makia Negrete, a pitcher out of San Diego who looks like he's ready to improve our rotation, as is at this point at almost 23 years old. But I don't know that we'll go for him in the second round. But definitely going to be some interesting options available, that's for sure. Among the top pitchers, there's really not a lot that I would be inclined to go for here. Penfold and Staten are both relievers, kind of two-pitch guys. Chris Hayden, if that changeup doesn't develop, he's a two-pitch guy and likely a very good reliever as well. You can see he does have interesting batting potential with contact that's off the charts. Gap power, home run power that could be above average. And he's pretty versatile defensively. So quite honestly, to me, he may actually be more interesting as a hitting prospect than as a pitching prospect, given that he's a reliever. Again, if that changeup doesn't develop, and no certainty that it will, like the work ethic on him, I think he's more interesting as a everyday player. Mike Schmidt, if we were going to go for a pitcher, is probably the guy that we'd go with. Potential 3-pitch arsenal, even if the changeup doesn't develop. Has the stamina to certainly start. Could have plus stuff, excellent movement, plus control, ground ball tendencies. 18 years old, who's already throwing in the low to mid 90s. Not great at holding runners. If he's available in the third round, I think we'd probably jump at the opportunity to bring him on board. But right now, I think if we were going to go with any of these guys, it would probably be with Chris Hayden. And again, more as a batting prospect who could play, honestly, somewhat similar to Sean Seifu. Looks like he can basically play any position on the field except for catcher. Not necessarily at a Gold Glove level, but there's still value in just a guy with a good bat who can play anywhere. And we'll take a look at a couple of the top hitting prospects. Edgar Ojeda, who's impossible to sign. Certainly looks like he could be a very interesting bat. Don't love the personality. Don't love the fact that it's going to probably take $15-16 million to get him signed. He's a guy who, if he's still sitting out there in the 4th or 5th round, would certainly take a flyer on given the money we have to spend, but not a guy that I think we're going to pick right now. Jonte Powers, as I mentioned, he was one of our final 8. He was one of the first ones of those final 8 that we got rid of. But the fact that he's still available here at the top of the second round is certainly extremely attractive. 70 contact and 70 home run power is a potentially devastating offensive combination. With that high work ethic and hopefully some good coaching, you hope he can come close to reaching that potential. Slightly above average in terms of his speed, has the range to certainly be a decent left fielder, could play right or center as well. And at 6'1", he could certainly play a competent first base for us. So he's definitely a interesting prospect in my mind. Catcher Edgar Mendoza is definitely not as good a prospect as Miller, but I love that 70 ability, love the work ethic, love the durability. If that bat does develop with that catcher ability, he could be almost as good as Medina, and could be an incredible catching tandem with Medina for a few years if he completely developed. So he's an interesting one to me. Among the college players, I believe it was Jerry Miller who was most interesting to me. Contact potentially off the charts, never going to strike out. He's durable. He's just about ready to produce at the major league level right now. And then another guy that I really liked was a high schooler, Tim Hull, shortstop. 70 range, high work ethic. His error, arm, and turn double play ratings aren't optimal for a second baseman or a shortstop, but there is a chance with good coaching that could turn him into something more than that. And certainly looks like if his bat fully develops, he's not going to walk as much as you'd like, but a more than competent offensive player potentially with decent speed and 70 range in the infield is certainly an interesting guy to consider taking. We'll see what our scout has to say. And our scout is recommended Jonte Powers, who was one of our top 8 guys. And quite honestly, I am very tempted at this point by Tim Hull. I think he's a really interesting prospect. Love the 70 range with a player who can actually hit. But I do think that Jonte Powers, again, with that work ethic, if he gets anywhere near the 70 contact and the 70 home run power that we think he can have, this guy can be right in the middle of our batting order for the next decade, hopefully in Buffalo. He was one of our top 8 guys when we started this episode. He still somehow has fallen to the 39th, 40th pick, whatever we are overall in the draft at this point. I think it's the 40th overall pick. We're going to go with Jonte Powers, and we're going to meet his demand. And maybe one of the guys that we've been talking about is going to fall to us in the 3rd round. You never know. This could be one of those drafts where everything just goes our way. Probably not, but you never know. And Tim Hull is still here in the 3rd round. Going to be awful hard for us to say no to him. But let's also take a look at the pitchers and who are available. And less options there at this point. Starting pitcher Phil Archangel. If he completely develops, he's an interesting prospect. But it's going to be hard for me to say no to Tim Hull in the 3rd round. I love that 70 range. You know, a lot of times when you get an infielder with 70 range, it's going to be a guy who can't hit. And it looks like there's a chance that Hull could be a decent offensive player. He's got the high work ethic I crave. I was a little upset that, I don't want to say upset, but I was a little torn on whether maybe we should reach for him in the 2nd round. With him being on the board here in the 3rd round, I'm not going to overthink it. Hull is the guy. Moving on to the 4th round, and Ojeda and that impossible to sign demand is still there. And we've got the money to potentially sign him if we want to just throw a stupid amount of money at him. So we're getting to the point where Ojeda is definitely someone to think about, but we're going to explore some other options before we make a decision. But right now, 3 rounds into this draft, really like the way that it's developed for us with 2 guys who are listed at shortstop as well as a center fielder. 2 of the top 8 guys on our board we've ended up getting. So I think it's been a pretty solid draft for Buffalo so far. And here in the 4th round, still some interesting players available. Edgar Ojeda, we've talked about, certainly has the talent to be a player who was picked long before the 4th round, like the left-handed bat. Signability is impossible, but we've got tons of money. personality is not great, but the bat for the fourth round is certainly special. Frank Castillo is another bat that we really like, though. Like the high work ethic, love the 70 outfield range, don't love the low error and arm ratings. But a guy with that range, you could definitely play in center field. Has really good speed, can steal some bases, really good bunter. Not going to walk a ton, but a pretty high ceiling if he completely develops. Eric O'Brien, right fielder, is a little less interesting to us. Same thing with the first baseman, Sherrell Reedus. Fine prospects, particularly for the fourth round, but with guys like Ojeda and Castillo around, think those are more the direction that we would go through. Taking a look at the top pitchers who are available, Penfold, the reliever, has been a guy that we looked at a long time ago. If he wasn't a pure reliever, obviously he wouldn't still be on the board, but potentially a really good fastball and a devastating screwball if he's able to completely develop. Could be a very good relief pitcher. I think if he's around in the fifth round, we'd seriously consider him. But with the guys that are on the board right now, I don't think we go for a reliever in the fourth. I think there's some times where a reliever like him would be a no-brainer in the fourth, but with those batters that we've got on the board, I don't think that's the right direction to go. The starting pitcher, Phil Archangel, is also on the board. Potentially has the three-pitch arsenal to be a starter, as we talked about already. Should be slightly above average in his stuff, movement, and control. For a fourth-round pick, he's not a bad prospect. Andy Feenstra, another reliever, is kind of the only other guy who's more than a three-star prospect that's left out there at this point. One other guy that we're not going to pick right now that I might take a flyer on if he's still around in the fifth round is catcher Gabe Coaster, college player, potentially a little bit above average defensively, like the high work ethic, and looks like he could have a more than competent major league bat if he completely develops. This is a guy who I could see being a backup catcher for us a year from now, and maybe growing into the guy who holds down that position until hopefully Medina is ready a few years later. Unlike the third round, we'll actually take a look at what our scouting director recommends, and he recommends Alejandro Casares, another catcher. Yeah, that's not going to happen. I'm not impressed with this recommendation from our scout. Low work ethic. The bat looks like it's not going to be major league quality, and he's only average defensively. Not going to lie, I am not really impressed with that recommendation from the scout. And I think Ojeda is a guy who I'd love to bring on board with a pick at some point if he keeps being out there because of his impossibility to sign. But right now, with a guy like Frank Castillo available, I just can't do it. High work ethic, good speed, excellent range in the outfield, and a bat that looks like it could be pretty interesting. In a way, he's kind of a poor man's Seifu in terms of that bat with the potentially excellent contact and gap power and avoiding strikeouts. And Castillo potentially has more home run power than Seifu. Not quite the same speed, but I think he's a really intriguing prospect, especially for the fourth round. So we're going to go with a second center fielder, two center fielders, and two shortstops in the first four rounds for the Buffalo Wings. We could be building the core of our team for potentially many years to come with this draft. Let's go ahead and see who's available in the fifth round. Ojeda still on the board. The catcher that we liked is gone. Catcher Pat Storch is out there. Very average defensively. Looks like kind of an average bat. for a fifth rounder, not a horrible guy to think about, but we're going to obviously do more work. This could be the time to take Edgar Ojeda in the fifth round. As I mentioned, we're going to have plenty of money to spend. So even if he comes and says he wants something considerably above 12, 13, 14 million dollars, it's really just going to cost us money. And the personality isn't the type that I would normally bring on board, but we've got a lot of great personalities throughout our farm system. We've got great coaching throughout our farm system. And that bat just isn't the type of bat that you're typically going to see in the fifth round. So unless one of the pitchers we talked about is here, I think Ojeda is the way to go. And yeah, the young starting pitcher is gone. Tim Penfold's still around. If he makes it to the, I was going to say, if he makes it to the sixth round, I think we take him there. Now, there is certainly an argument that you take Penfold, who's not looking for a ton of money right now, and you roll the dice that Edgar Ojeda, because he's impossible to sign, is still going to be there in the sixth round. But I honestly feel that Ojeda's the guy we've got to go for right now. I'd love it if Penfold was still around in the sixth round. But as far as who's a more unique player to have available in the fifth round, I think there's no question it's a guy with a bat like Edgar Ojeda who could be a well above average major league bat. You know, unfortunately, gap power is potentially his best skill, and he's got no speed at all, so he's not going to be generating the extra base hits some of those other guys we've drafted with excellent gap power could be. But I think here in the fifth round, in a year when we've got tons of money to spend, the impossible to sign Ojeda is the right way for us to go. Although now I'm second guessing myself looking at the impossible to sign Chad Andrews also being out there. Definitely not as good a bat as Ojeda, but there's an argument to me that, you know, maybe Andrews or Ojeda is still around in the sixth round for us to pick, and we go for Penfold, the potentially excellent reliever here. And I think I'm talking myself into that. I'm going to go with Penfold. We'll see what the scouting director recommends. Eric Batanti, a guy from our Cincinnati Reds draft who we got in the late rounds. Certainly not, the mid rounds more accurately. Certainly not a bad guy to think about here in the fifth round, but Batanti maybe makes it to the sixth. And I think I'm going to roll the dice. I'm trying to turn this into just a draft that could be potentially incredible for Buffalo, and hoping that Ojeda makes it to the sixth, since he's impossible to sign and not the best in the clubhouse. Chad Andrews or Batanti wouldn't be a bad fallback. I'm trying to just make this an epic draft, and I think the way to make it epic is to take Penfold now, because I don't think he's going to be around in the sixth round, and I hope that one of those impossible to sign guys still is. So we're going to draft Penfold here in the fifth, auto draft into the sixth, and Ojeda is still around. So that worked out really well. We're going to take Ojeda. You know, the money's going to be insane. The personality is prickly, but the potential bat and the potential talent for the sixth round is just undeniable. So Edgar Ojeda, we're going to bring you on board in the sixth round. Moving on to the seventh, obviously it's kind of a different crew of players than the ones that I've looked in deeply, because you've seen me sim through these last two rounds in real time very quickly. So I'm going to need a little time to regroup. It looks like Batanti was just picked by the Stars, the pick before us. But I certainly do not have any complaints right now. You look at the draftees that we bought on board. Seifu and Hull, a couple of big-time infield prospects. Powers and Castillo, a couple of big-time center field prospects. Tim Penfold, who was a premier relief prospect. And then Edgar Ojeda, who is just an incredible bat to try to get here in the 6th round. And I really like the way this draft has fallen so far for us through the first 6 rounds. And while we're on this screen, you can see we're not messing around. We're just giving people what they're looking for. We could argue and try to get Castillo or Penfold for a little bit less, but we've got so much money to spend this season. Let's just get the guys on board and onto our minor league teams as soon as possible. We'll see what Edgar Ojeda has to say. Bonus significantly above $12 million to consider signing. We've got budget room of $52 million left. Probably our last shot at signing him. Well, we're going to offer you $15,151,515. So over $3 million more than the $12 million he's looking for. I can't imagine that a $15 million plus bonus isn't going to be enough to convince him to not go to college. So we're going to submit that offer to Edgar Ojeda. It's not money that we can carry forward, kind of the big benefit we had of all the cash that we've got to spend this year, given that although we have one of the smallest budgets in baseball, we have by far the lowest player payroll. So there's a ton of money for us to play around with. I know some of you have brought this up as a strategy that we should pursue in this draft, and obviously it's a strategy that we have pursued in previous drafts and previous playthroughs and tried to pursue in previous drafts and previous playthroughs at times, and it didn't quite work out for us. But this year, with a premier talent falling into the 6th round and us being able to potentially scoop him up and maybe sign him, I think things are going well for Buffalo. Whether you agree or disagree, would love to hear the thoughts in the comments. Let me know. Am I talking my book too much, or is this potentially a really good draft? And here in the 7th round, scouting director recommends Nate Pillow, second baseman. The bat, looks like it's a competent major league bat, like the durability. Don't love the defense, don't love the speed, don't love the low leadership and low adaptability. I think there's a different direction that we're going to go. Obviously, we've taken just one pitcher, a reliever, through the first 6 rounds of this draft. The pickings as far as starting pitchers are definitely not strong at this point. But Jaquan Bethea, I think, is the best of the rest who are left. No certainty that he's going to develop a 4-pitch arsenal, but I do like the durability, do like the excellent movement, do like that he's an 18-year-old who's already throwing in the low to mid-90s. The ground ball tendencies and the low movement should be able to avoid giving up too many home runs and hopefully benefit from some good defense if he makes it to the majors. Don't love the lack of control. Don't love the fact that his stuff is only looking average-ish. Decent chance that he just ends up a reliever, and probably an even better chance that he just washes out and doesn't make it to the majors. But as a 7th rounder, a guy who, in a perfect scenario, and maybe with some great coaching and maybe with some excellent coaches who help him unlock something mechanically that our scout can't see right now, I think Bethea is worth a flyer here in the 7th round. Moving on to the 8th, scouting director recommends Eric Faber. Anyone who's ever watched me do a draft video before knows that low work ethic, low intelligence, low adaptability, and high greed, you are going to have to be an incredible prospect for me to take you anywhere in the draft. Doesn't matter whether it's the 20th round, the 8th round, or the 1st round. So Faber will not be the selection. And we're going to go with another pitcher here in the 8th round, Mike Schumacher. You can see with a curveball that we think only has 35 potential, and a changeup being another one of his pitches. There's a good chance, in probably the most likely scenarios, he ends up being a washout as a starter and fighting to make a major league roster 5-6 years from now as a reliever. But if that changeup does develop, and it's certainly not guaranteed, he could be a back end of the rotation kind of guy, like the durability, enough stamina to start. It's a long shot, but it's a 8th round pick at this point, and I'd at least prefer to bring somebody on board who I can make an argument that they could become a starter, and there aren't too many guys out there. I have to go through some mental contortions to turn Schumacher into a starter, but it's not impossible, so he's the guy that we're going to go with here in the 8th round. Moving on to the 9th, Alejandro Casares, who our scout recommended a few rounds back, shockingly is still available, and not shockingly, we are still not going to pick him. We're going to go with another pitcher here in the 9th round. Chris Bailey is just a reliever. Like that he's durable, like that he's got a good personality, good influence, barely 18 years old. Probably not going to ever have the stuff to be a big-time major league pitcher. But in the 9th round, he's a good personality and another guy that, if everything goes well, could argue he's a useful major league player. And earlier in the draft, we missed out on the pitcher, the Archangel. But we're going to go with Dan Pentecost, keeping those religious themes going here in the draft. 10th round prospect, not horrible. Like the work ethic and leadership, like the range. He's got the ability to play a lot of different positions in the infield. And with the contact and the gap power and the potential avoiding strikeouts all being above average to excellent, don't love that he's going to be about as bad as possible at hitting home runs. He is not a big slugger, but the glove and the personality are interesting enough to us that we're going to take a flyer on Pentecost here in the 10th round. And here in the 11th round, the recommendation is still Alejandro Casares, and we are still going to say no to that. And I think it was in the 2023 draft, which I believe might have been our first episode of this series. We did go all 20 rounds. I think that's something that somebody had asked for in the past. I think it was Patrick DeBonis, just kind of wanted to see what our thought process got to be in the late rounds, since I don't typically go into that depth, and since we're already in the 11th round here, and I've spent a lot of time talking to you, and you've got to see my mental state and the contortions I go through when making decisions. Might as well just make this a episode purely focused on the draft. So I'm going to go through the last 10 picks in. For those who are still interested, you'll be able to see the kind of guys I bring on board in the late rounds. Hints, it's guys with good personalities when they're not real prospects. And in the 11th round, we're going to go with center fielder Eric Prieto, another guy with high work ethic, has some speed, has some ability to play all over the outfield. I don't think he's ever going to really be a major league hitter, but he's a good influence on people in the clubhouse, can play a lot of different positions. I don't love the poor competition level that he's been facing at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York City. But at this point, if you've got a decent amount of potential and a good personality, you're the type of guy that I might be willing to bring on board. Here in round 12, our scout recommends we go with Chris Wall, high school third baseman. Looks, in a best case scenario, that he is a borderline major league third baseman. We are going to go in a different direction. We are going to go with. Who are we going to go with? I had decided and now I've forgotten who it was. Was it Josh? No, it was not Josh Arroyo. Must have been Chris Athanas. Yes. Yes, Chris Athanas. Good work ethic and adaptability, ability to kind of play anywhere in the outfield, and honestly, with his height of 6 feet and the good arm, they have him listed at first base and third base. I don't think either of those is a particularly good decision, but if his bat fully develops, he can hit the ball at the major league level. His on-base percentage is going to be brutal because he's never going to walk. But for an 11th rounder, good personality, can play a couple of different outfield positions, and in a perfect world could be a competentish major league player with the exception of his poor batting eye. Moving on to the 13th round, Scout recommends the reliever Mike Fletcher. I think we can find someone better. And here in the 13th round, we're going to go with Chrysler Cone, a center fielder. Don't love the low adaptability and intelligence, but pretty good outfield range, pretty good speed. Looks like he could be a competent major league hitter with the exception of not hitting any home runs, kind of a common theme in guys that we've seen in these later rounds. But Chrysler Cohen, going to be our 13th round pick. On to the 14th, Chad Steiner Jr. is the recommendation. Do like the personality, but certainly not a future major leaguer. Guy that we could certainly revisit in later rounds, but I don't think he's a guy that we're going to go with quite yet. And I know I said a round or two ago that Mike Fletcher was not a guy that we were going to pick. I don't love the low work ethic, but the 65 stuff is by far the best of any pitcher who's still available. I don't think he makes it as a reliever. But at this point in the draft, particularly for a guy who's not even 18 years old, in terms of tools, his stuff is the best by far of anyone that's available, just in case you don't believe me. He's got that 65 stuff. There's one other guy with 60 stuff, Vince Sabatka, who just has no chance at all with that poor movement and control. I don't think there's a great chance for Fletcher, but we're also in the 14th round. Probably not going to find a lot of guys who have great chances. 15th round recommendations, Mike Litzy, starting pitching prospect. Definitely when we start getting into these late rounds, going to start pivoting towards guys who have no personality flaws. So probably means that Litzy won't end up being our guy. And here in the 15th round, we're going to go with the catcher, Tommy Barnes. Pretty positive personality. Like the durability. Don't love the defense. The bat's likely never going to be major league quality, but the high work ethic and the high intelligence should help influence those around him in the minors. So we'll go ahead and pick Tommy Barnes. Scouting director recommendation for the 16th. Ooh, Alejandro Casares, a guy that you were recommending to us about 10 rounds ago, is still available. What a shocker. You recommend him one more time, you're going to get yourself fired. We're going to go with the center fielder, Jaden Bastian, instead. Good personality, high loyalty, low greed, good work ethic. I don't think he develops into a major leaguer. Best case scenario is kind of a fifth outfielder. But we're in the 16th round, and he's at least a guy who should be a good influence on those around him. So we're going to go with Bastian. Moving to the 17th round, Luis Dagnino, starting pitching prospect. The pickings are going to be slim. I don't know if they're slim enough that Dagnino is going to be the guy we go with, but we'll spend some time and let you know. Here we're going to go with Flint Burbage instead. Canadian guy, smart. He's smart. That's about all we can say about him. Beggars can't be choosers this late in the draft. Recommendation for the 18th. I told you not to come back with me with Alejandro Casares. Gonna think about firing you. We are instead going to go with the center fielder, Stefan Risper. High work ethic, has the ability to play a number of different positions, a little bit of speed. We're basically just looking for guys who are going to be good influences on and hopefully help the development of the real prospects around them at this point. Devon Chisley, recommended here in the 19th round. He's a guy that I've looked at in some of the last couple of rounds. Like the personality in general, we'll go ahead and pick him. And then last but not least, in the 20th round, back to Luis Dagnino. I don't think he's going to be the answer. And in the 20th round, final pick of the draft, we're going to go with Sean Perry. High leadership, high work ethic, not a real prospect, but a good guy to have in the clubhouse with our real prospects. So Sean Perry, congratulations. You're a professional ball player. And with that, our draft is complete. I don't think there's anyone else that we picked over those last 14 rounds that we need to negotiate with. Actually, there were. I wasn't paying close attention to the amount of money some of these players were looking for, but it was actually some of the earlier guys, Bethea in the 7th, Pentecost in the 10th, and Athanas in the 12th, who are looking for more than slot. We've got money to spend. Like I said, we are just going to make the offers to these guys to try to get them in camp. If it was a situation in a couple of years when we're likely to have a much higher major league payroll and probably not have as much financial flexibility, might try to get these guys for 500, 550, 600,000, save every penny that we can before getting them signed. But this year, even with those offers out there, you can see we've got tons of money available. So in our next episode, we're going to figure out if there's any talent that we can bring on through the trade market potentially. I've taken a look, not with you guys, but on my own at the trading block, and not a ton of high-end talent available, at least in terms of players who are actively being shopped by their teams. That said, if there's a deal out there, we're going to look to make it. And we've still got about 3.5 weeks until the end of July. So there's also potential for some other players to be put on the trade block. And obviously there's no reason that we can't just ask for somebody who doesn't happen to be on the trade block either. So we're going to have a lot to do in our next episode in terms of simming through the month of July, as well as I said, figuring out if there's anyone who we can add to help us in trade. And we're not necessarily looking for a 1-year rental at this point. We're also hoping to bring on somebody who can hopefully help us into the future next season and the year after, when we are hopefully more likely to be true contenders. So we'll find out what we can do in the trade market before the trade deadline for 2026 in our next episode. In the meantime, if you've got thoughts on what we did in the draft, would love to hear them. And until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.